Johannes a Scotchman, put to death by his scholars for the confession of the evangelical truth through the instigation of some monks at Meldom, in England, about A.D. 884. Johannes a Scotsman, and hence called Scotus, flourished in the manner of his doctrine in the time of the Emperor Louis the Pious and his son Lothair, somewhere in one of the cities of France. He was exceedingly virtuous, learned, and eloquent, and consequently, for his eminent gifts, highly celebrated and esteemed. For when Charles, one of the sons of the above emperor, was desirous of having a good translation and exposition of the books of Dionysius, the Areopagite, especially the treatise of Hierarchia, this was a treatise on the name of God and the heavenly order of the angels, John executed the same very laudably and with marked ability, so that one Anastasius, who was librarian at the time and composed a preface to it, writes of him thus: "It is astonishing how this barbarian, that is, foreigner or Scotsman, who hails from the uttermost parts of the world, was able to comprehend with his understanding such high things and to translate them, said book of Dionysius, into another language, namely, from the Greek into the Latin. I refer to Johannes the Scotsman, concerning whom I've heard that he is a very holy and godly man. This is the testimony even of one of his adversaries, touching his learning and godliness, so that it is not necessary for us to adduce additional testimony relative to this point from other authors, hence we let it suffice. Afterwards, it seems, he wrote a book on the Eucharist, that is, on the thank-offering of the supper, in which he very profoundly and conclusively refuted the gross error of the papists in the matter of transubstantiation, or the essential change of the bread into the body of Jesus Christ, also the Mass and the sacrifice, which thereby in popery is offered for both the living and the dead. This was the cause of his death, as the sequel shows. When he had written this book, it was greatly esteemed by some, among whom subsequently was Berengarius, deacon of the church at Angiers, of whom it is stated that he took and learned his belief respecting this point, and perhaps also against infant baptism, since he strenuously dissuaded from it, from the writings of Johannes Scotus, of which we propose to speak more fully in the proper place. On the other hand, said book was exceedingly hated by those who were zealous defenders of the Roman superstitions, especially of transubstantiation and the Mass, so much so that when it had come before Pope Leo IX, the result was that both, as appears, he and his book were condemned and anathematized as heretical, which was done chiefly in the Council of Versailles. When this had thus happened, and he had incurred the hatred of the Pope and many of the papists, he left the city of Paris, where he was rector of the university, and also France, and went to England, where he took up his residence at Meldom, supporting himself by teaching and instructing inexperienced youths. But after a few years, when the spite and hatred of some monks could tolerate him no longer on account of his faith against the Roman Church, they instigated his scholars against him, so that they stabbed him to death with awls and penknives. Other writers are of the opinion that the monks did it themselves. Both may be true. The monks, having instigated the young men and probably finding them too timid, may have led off in the murder, the youths following with penknives, owls, etc., so that said martyr lost his life under their hands. This much is certain, that he died a cruel death for his faith, and that the monks, through the instrumentality of his scholars, were in no small measure the cause of it, as the records of his death inform us. Concerning the time of his history, note, P.J. Twisk gives two different accounts concerning it. In the first, he fixes the date AD 869. In the second, he fixes it AD 884. In the first place, he calls him Johannes Scotus, in the second, Johannes a. However, as the account itself declares, it is the same person. As to the dates 869 and 884, to which the history of said Johannes has been referred by him, someone might think that this could not very well be reconciled, which may, however, easily be done, if we take the year 869 as the time in which said martyr flourished and propagated his doctrine, and the year 884 as the time when he died and was martyred for the principles which he taught. Further observation touching the history itself according to the account of Carrion, P. Melanchthon, and C. Pucer. In the time of Emperor Louis the Pious, said authors say, Johannes Scotus read and explained publicly in the schools Dionysius' treatise Hierarchia. This Johannes Scotus, when he censured and refuted with good reasons the false and impious tenet of the sacrifice of the Mass, concerning which others at the time taught that in the supper Christ was to be offered up for the living and the dead, was stabbed to death by his disciples and hearers with penknives. Concerning said history according to the account of Sebastian Frank of Worth, Johannes, surnamed Scotus, not of the Grey Friars, wrote a treatise on the sacrament, denying the presence of the body and blood of Christ. He was condemned in the Council of Versailles. He was rector at Paris, eminently versed in the languages and the phoenix of his age. The Emperor Lothair held him in great esteem. Of him there have written Platina, etc. P.J. Twisk's account of said Johannes Scotus. Johannes Scotus, he writes, lived under the Emperor Louis the Pious, and wrote strenuously against transubstantiation. On a certain occasion, when he in an exposition was severely censuring the delusion of the blasphemous oblation or offering up of the Lord Christ in the supper for the living and the dead, his disciples and hearers killed him with iron styles. Further explanation touching said J. Scotus, according to the account of the papist Baronius, as noted by A. Melanus. But let us add, says he, the opinion of Baronius touching this Scotsman, as regards Johannes Scotus. We have said above, in the proper place, that he was in bad repute with the Pope Nicholas I, although he wrote so violently against the Catholic faith, yet as he did not spread it among the people, so that his views became known to all, many had a good opinion of him, so much so that they, though most inconsiderably, thus he speaks from a papistic standpoint, gave him the title of Martyr. From this account it appears that the papist Baronius, who was a cardinal of the Roman See, was not pleased that many had a good opinion of Johannes Scotus, and, what is still more, gave him the title of Martyr. But this is not to be wondered at, since the true papists have a good opinion of none but those who adhere to the Roman superstitions, and never dare utter a word of censure against them. And they would confer the title of martyr upon no one but those who have suffered for the Roman See and its traditions, which are a parcel of human inventions. However, we will let them answer for this, and leave it. We return to Johannes Scotus and say that as regards his boldness he showed himself as behooves a true martyr, since, to clear his conscience and defend the oppressed truth, he did not hesitate to incur the hatred of the Pope and the Papists, yea, the prospect of being anathematized, excommunicated, and finally miserably tortured and put to death for it. He did for the confession of the Christian and evangelical truth, particularly for the article by which we commemorate the Lord's death, and in which lies the consolation of the soul with regard to our blessed redemption. But since Belengarius, who opposed not only transubstantiation and the Mass, but also infant baptism, and afterwards was charged with having embodied and obtained his belief from Johannes Scotus, the aforementioned martyr, we may conclude that said martyr must have opposed infant baptism, otherwise it could not be said in general words that Belengarius imbibed or obtained his views from J. Scotus, which is nevertheless frequently and confidently asserted by ancient writers. With this we will take our leave of J. Scotus, and also of our account of the martyrs of this century, as being sufficient for the well-disposed. For the evil-disposed we care not. Hence our soul shall rest, and content itself with the pious.